Welcome to the Australian Calabrese Cultural Association program, Sono Calabrese, which is a program where we have conversations with members of our community who tell us a little bit about their lives and their history and how they've related to the Australian society. I should indicate that the program is unedited because we take the view that what's important is the subject with whom we're conversing rather than our own perception. So it might be a bit raw, but it'll be real. And our guest today is Michelle Loilo, who's the owner and operator of Unica cucina here in Capel Sound, and she will tell us in a little while about the business. But as well as that, she was also at one stage an activist in terms of challenging the legislation relating to COVID and the curfew, and so we'll ask her about her experiences. And as some of you may know, she was at one stage going to seek pre-selection for the Liberal Party for one of the seats, but apparently that didn't transpire, and we'd be interested in knowing a little bit about this as well. So thank you, Michelle, and thank you for joining us. First of all, I want to ask you about your parents. Your parents were both born in Calabria.
Both of them, both from Riace, Città dei Bronzi, so a little bit famous for a very small town.
Yeah. And that's obviously in the province of Reggio.
We're from Brunci Reggio on the Unica.
Yeah, thank you. And your father, when did he come to Australia?
Dad came out to Australia in 1956. Some friends of his from our town were already here in Melbourne, so back then it was the sponsor, I think it was called. So they paid for his ticket to come out. My dad had recently been married to his first wife and didn't know, but had left her there pregnant. So got on the boat over here and landed in Melbourne in 1956.
Right. And obviously his first wife didn't follow.
She did follow, so she followed 6 years later. So they had a child over there, my eldest brother, and then she came out here. Unfortunately, I think it was 7 years after she arrived here, was in a car accident. My father was driving at the time, someone ran a red light. She lost her life, and my father was left in a coma for 6 weeks. And when he came out of that coma, he found himself with 4 kids and partially paralysed. So, yeah.
What sort of work did your father do before he came
My
out?
father had done quite a few different things. He'd worked in factories, he'd worked for a glass factory, and then came upon someone who discovered that my dad was a very intelligent man. So my father was working on planes at the Roman airport, believe it or not, and they were going to be sponsoring him to become an engineer, a mechanical engineer. Then he had a car accident and had 4 kids and had to go and work in factories, restaurants, and
So, manual labour?
A lot of manual labour.
Yeah. And you said that happened around about early 70s?
Early 70s, so late 60s, early 70s.
Right. And how did he meet your mother?
So my mum and dad are from the same village. My grandmother, so my paternal grandmother, actually delivered my mother. So she was what was called the level teacher in the Paese. And my maternal grandmother had difficulty during her pregnancy, so my other grandmother was called in. So they knew each other their whole lives. My eldest uncle on my mother's side and my father were friends. My dad had travelled back to Italy in 1976, saw my mum, fell in love with her immediately, but she was engaged to somebody else, so he left it at that. However, he did go to a church in Stignano, right behind us, and prayed to St. Anthony that if he would give him the grazia of my mum, then he would return every year and give what we call a dota, so give money to the church. In 1978 he found out that my mum had broken up with her fiance. So he gets on a plane on his own, goes there, follows her around for 2 weeks. My grandmother, get away from my daughter. My mum, get away from the old man. My dad was 44, my mum was 27. And quite the catch at the time, had her own business and was doing well. Then it came one day that he must have got mum in a weak moment and told her Dad said to mum, meet me at your auntie's house, we'll have a coffee. So off she went to have this coffee and thought, I'll get rid of him that way, I'll just have this coffee. Mum turned up there, Dad turned up there. They sit down for this coffee with my auntie there. Obviously, men and women didn't. Well, not obviously, men and women didn't meet alone at the time. My uncle found out about this, storms into the house with a gun in his hand. My dad threw my mum out the door. My uncle grabbed her hair and ripped part of her hair out of her head. It's like a bit of a movie. Dad chased straight after her. He had this yellow alpha spider. They took off and came back 6 weeks later married.
So effectively, it's
Eloped. Eloped, but had never held hands, never kissed, nothing. But back then, if you went away with a boy, you didn't come home.
And interestingly, they couldn't have really known each other because
they didn't know each other
they
at all.
didn't speak.
At all.
So it was all visual on the part of
It was all visual. Mum said that first night she just cried on the edge of the bed and really just wanted to go home to her folks. My dad didn't do anything bad to her. It was just a really heavy situation and she didn't see a way out of it except to marry him.
And they came back to Australia immediately after they were married.
So they were married. They didn't go back to the village until they were legally married, so they had to wait 6 weeks. Then my grandparents put on a huge wedding party for them.
So they accepted it?
They didn't, but so one of my uncles didn't even go to the wedding. It's a little bit sad, makes me cry, but anyway. Dad was always very good to my grandparents. They're not with us anymore. But it was really hard for my mum. Sorry.
It's all right.
So it was really hard for my mum. They did accept the fact that they were married. My dad promised my grandmother that he would take her home every year. So we had, they went on a honeymoon after that for 3 months, had a lovely time. Mum arrived here pregnant with me.
And I'm interested, you said your mum was in business.
Yes.
What sort of business? Because
So she was a seamstress.
Right.
So she was allowed to go off to seamstress school. Went off and did really well. She loved fashion. My mum was the first woman to wear pants in her village. That was another big no-no. Women did not wear pants. So she was the first woman to walk the streets through the piazza in pants and scandalise my poor grandmother. She ended up having 5 girls working for her, which was not a done thing back then either. So she was
And she literally abandoned the business in order to marry.
She did. Well, she didn't need to get married. This was the whole thing, and it still churns in my mind as well. She was very self-sufficient and was probably, back then there wasn't, my grandparents were not money people, wealthy people. They worked their whole lives and had what they had. But my mum had an income and quite a lot of savings as well because she lived at home with her parents.
Yeah, but as you say, the fact that she was seen alone with a man.
That was it. Well, my grandmother said to my dad at the time, leave her with us, we don't care.
Right.
Go, leave our daughter with us. And my grandfather said to my dad, this will be the last time you see me. And my grandfather died 2 years later, so it was quite...
So obviously you were conceived in Italy.
Conceived in Italy and born here, yes. Yes.
You mentioned 4 children from the prior marriage.
Yeah. They're a lot older.
Siblings?
So they're closer in age to my mum.
Right.
So my dad was 18 the first time he was married, and it was an arranged marriage, which was very...
And are they still in Australia?
They're all here, yeah. So the 2 oldest ones were born in Italy, came out here. I don't have a lot to do with them, just because of the age gap. Yeah. And they weren't home when I was born, so they were married.
Oh, they'd already left.
I've got nieces and nephews my age.
And do you have any younger siblings?
No, not at all.
So
It's just me. Yeah, just me.
From that, what did your mother do when she got to Australia?
Cried a lot, wanted to go home, was very pregnant and very sick. And I think a lot of it had to do with the stress and being away from home. I don't know if you've been back to Calabria and know where I'm from, but Riace is a very small town and everybody knows everybody. And she came here, I was on the Mornington Peninsula and couldn't speak a word of English. And initially had no license, didn't need a license, had no car and wasn't used to that.
And the isolation implied in immigration anyway. But so did she work when she got to Australia?
She did. She was a seamstress when she got here. Dad had some friends that were already here that were Italian. One of them, her name was Connie, and she was a seamstress as well. So she sort of helped Mum get some work. And my mum diligently went to English school for probably the first 10 years of my life in order to assimilate.
And to learn the language.
Because we're on the peninsula, there was no Italian, not none, but barely any Italian. So she, having me, I think, pushed her into English speaking.
So you were raised in the Mornington Peninsula?
Yes. Yeah. So we did backwards.
You went to school here?
I went to school here. I also did primary school in Italy. So every time we would go home, it would be from, I say home, I was born here. We would go for about 6 months at a time. So my education up until about the age of 11 was split.
And I want to ask you, what differences were there between the education system here and the education in Italy?
I think education in Italy is better. It's a lot more memory driven, and I think that school or education is a lot about reading and remembering. And so over there you would do things like recita, and you would have to recite whatever it was that you had learned. So so I found it to be a better formative education. I didn't do any higher levels of education there, so I don't know how that functions, but I found it.
And you said that initially you went back with your parents every year.
Yes.
So how long did that be?
We did that until I was 15.
Right. So
until my grandparents were alive.
Right.
So my grandfather died when I was 2, so we managed to get back. I was baptised in Italy, and then my grandfather passed. But every year, my dad still was committed to my grandmother.
So obviously you were bilingual. You spoke.
My first language was dialect. It wasn't even Italian. It was dialect, and I have a very hardcore accent in my dialect. And when I'm tired, that's what I revert back to. My English is obviously quite articulate, and my Italian I didn't pick up in a serious way until I was an adult. To be honest,
So even when you were doing primary school, basically in Italy, the language was still.
We were in a village, and everyone. I mean, the teachers spoke Italian and understood them, but in amongst ourselves, we played and spoke in dialect.
And in terms of relationships with your schoolmates, how did you go coming from Australia going to Italy?
It's hard. I find it. I still find it hard to relate to Australian culture here, and I still call Italy home.
Well, the interesting thing is that a lot of others have told me that when they've gone back to Italy, they were born here, they would immediately be called Lossiliano.
I think because my dialect was, and it is still very so articulate, and I still have friends over there that I went to primary school with, and we've maintained that friendship. I'm 45 next week, so we've maintained it for 45 years.
And do you have friends from school?
Yeah.
From here in Australia?
From here in Australia. Yes and no. I'm not a very social person. As much as I do a social type of work, I'm not.
But it's
I do have friends here. I'm not a loner, but
clearly you're closer to the people in Italy than I am. And that's interesting. But why do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, I have 2 very best friends here who are both Calabrese, so Italo-Italiani, and I don't know if it's that I really crave what I call home, and I really like to be surrounded with that, plus my work. My background's HR, this is not what I do for a living.
And in terms, obviously you did your higher education here in Australia.
Yes.
And you say that you're the first person in your family to actually get a tertiary degree, tertiary education.
Yeah, my mum was very hell-bent on me going to university. From a very young age, I was told.
And did she tell you why?
Look, I think a lot of it had to do with her mother was never given the opportunity to go to school. My paternal grandmother was born in 1897 in our village. There was no school, so to speak, for women, and neither for men, unless you had money. So we came from very poor families, both sides of our family.
And a lot of them saw it as an aspirational thing in the sense that in order to do well, you'd have a better chance of doing well if you were educated.
I think that's where Mum was going with it. I also started work at a very young age, so my dad still had a big hand on my upbringing. At 14, I was at work as well.
So from what you're saying, your mum encouraged you to study.
Yeah.
Your dad wanted you to earn a living.
Yeah, Dad didn't see much value in studying.
Earning an income.
He was
Being
very
productive.
headstrong on, and I think because he was widowed at 34 and he saw the situation that he'd been in, he was very on all, and I know he was the same as other kids. Go and make money and make sure you can look after yourself because you never want to be in a situation.
You want to be
Yeah.
dependent. And what was he that? Did he oppose you going to university?
He just thought it was a waste of time and money. Yeah, you'll go out and do whatever you want to do, irrespective of whether you go to uni.
But notwithstanding his opposition, your mother's view prevailed,
Yes.
and you got a degree.
Look, my mum did a lot of stuff in secret with me. I had piano lessons that Dad didn't know about. I played tennis. I was a singer in public until I was about 27. My dad hadn't heard me sing until I was 25. He didn't know I could sing. So it was a big secret doing
Why
these
do you think
things.
that was? That in order to have harmony in the home, in other words, Dad was out.
Well, Dad was at
And
work all
as
the
long as he
time.
didn't know what you were doing,
Yes.
it didn't matter.
Oh, we weren't breaking the law, but
No.
in his mind it was just a waste of time.
But it is interesting that your mother took that view.
Yeah.
Because as you know, the general picture is wives were suppressed and repressed.
Well, look, I think because she had had her own business, and she was 27 when she got married, which was old for her age group. She had a good sense of self as well as a woman, which wasn't usual and is not usual for women her age. But she has a really good sense of self, which is nice.
And what sort of work, obviously, would have been part-time work when you were studying?
Yes, yeah.
What sort of work did you do?
My first job was at KFC.
Right.
Yeah, I loved it. We used to pick chicken bits out, fly, guts and all that fun stuff. Then moved into, I worked at Woolworths and was a checkout chick. And then I got my first office job as an admin assistant at 18, which is when I started university.
And what degree did you do at university?
So my undergrad was sociology and psychology, because I was very interested in people and the way that they assimilate different cultures and background. And then my postgrad was business development and HR.
And did you go into HR?
I went straight into, not straight in, I went into HR, I worked for Allianz Workers' Compensation and the Victorian Work Cover Authority at different points in time.
When did you work at the Victorian Work Cover?
In my 20s, which I loved. And I had the opportunity to work with the senior legal advisors there, and I was...
Who was they? Gary Edmund?
Tim Fox was our senior legal advisor at the time, and he made a really big impression on me. And he was great. He let me get into stuff that I shouldn't have been allowed into at 22. But I was able to go into Supreme Court and do things that I shouldn't have been doing anyway. But he invited me into that.
And how long did you work there?
I worked there for about 5 years.
And why did you leave?
I left because I went on to start a family, and that was when I was 27. Yeah.
Which leads, when did you meet your husband? Because I think that's an interesting
It is. I'm just going to do this a little. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
My apologies.
Can you stop?
Sorry. Thank you. Sorry for crying before. That came from nowhere.